Welcome to another video on the ESCO YouTube channel. Get ready, brace your heart, because I'm about to bring you one of the most dramatic moments ever seen in a classic chess tournament, the last round of Norwich. Unbelievable things are happening here. I want to show this to you in rich detail with images of the players and everything that was witnessed. Because look, Magnus was leading the tournament along with Caruana and Gukesh, and in the last round, Caruana beat the current world champion, Gukesh. With some dramatic images at the moment, Gukesh resigned. Gukesh threw himself over the board. There was no doubt that both were fighting hard, but this victory put Caruana in the lead of the tournament. Half a point ahead of Magnus, who was playing the last round precisely against the Indian genius Arjun Ergais. And Magnus here needed a draw. That's the reality, because a draw would take the game to Armageddon. And in Armageddon, according to the rules, even if you lose Armageddon, you still get a point that would keep Magnus ahead of Caruana. All of this was set, and Magnus needed that draw. But what happened in this game borders on insanity. I want to show you one of the greatest battles ever seen in chess. But I warn you, hold on to your seat, get your popcorn ready, and let's go. Magnus Ergais with Nuruga playing for the draw now. Indian prodigy Arjun Ergais, playing white, faces Magnus Carlsen in an unforgettable Queen's Gambit match. They enter a well-known technical position with the exchange on 5 and the bishop to b5 variation, which is rich in theory that nobody anticipated. Not surprised at all. Let's see what the middle game plan will be. Magnus gets out of this pin, preparing. Of course, the idea is to castle, and rook e3 is a natural move to bring the bishop over. Castling was played quickly, bishop d3 and castling were played quickly, bishop d3 and h6. He gives a little push to that bishop, and Ergais keeps the pieces in the game. Ergais will try, of course, to win this game against the Norwegian, controlling the center with e6, controlling the center. And here, knight e2, knight d7 and castling, everything is normal, and Magnus shows the plan he's going to try to use in this game, which is playing on the queen side. So there are several ways to choose how you're going to play this middle game, and that's Magnus's choice. And Ergais is the one who makes the first battle cry of the game. He plays f3, preparing e4, a classic plan that was played a lot by Kasparov. Even today, at the highest level, you play this f3 idea. Preparing e4, the game is about to intensify. At this moment, there is no doubt. This is a very, very interesting plan. Notice that Magnus doesn't care. He sticks to his plan on the queen side. Ergais played queen to 2, already pointing out the pieces. The c6 square could be a future weakness for black with this expansion. Ergais quickly moved the rook to e8, keeping a watchful eye on the board. At the e3 square, on the e4 break, which might happen, and Ergais didn't take long. He played e4, speeding things up and taking the center. From here, the position will intensify, becoming really intense, without a doubt. Magnus plays b4 to distract one of the pieces controlling the center. Knight a4 is played, keeping an eye on c6 and e4. Magnus goes for the fine line. Look, he captures on e4 and now he drops the first bomb of the game. Knight takes e4, and here Magnus seems to be winning a pawn, but actually he's not. With this move, he's going to exchange the e4 pawn for the c6 pawn, which is also falling. First, Claudio has a piece hanging on h4. Ergais exchanged here, and now Magnus. Ergais recovers his pawn with queen takes c6, and in fact, it's an exchange of a central pawn for a wing pawn. But look at what happens now, because Ergais is momentarily threatening the rook on a8. But here, another theme appears, which maybe Magnus missed when he played knight takes e4. Another idea, which is rook takes f7. And this will completely change the course of the game, because look at Magnus here. He brings the knight back to f6, and notice that this move is considered an inaccuracy. Look at the images, the moment Magnus made this move. Now let's understand why the engine actually criticizes this move, but I would say that from a human perspective, it's the best option Magnus could have in this game, even though it's extremely risky. The engine says the move here was knight to d2, still giving up the rook on a8, which would lead to a super complicated position. Now, Raphael, why did he come back here? Why didn't he play rook to b8? That's the point. You take this blow. What Magnus realized, now you defended the rook, but I'm destroying everything. If you take, you lose due to the pin. It's game over. There's no way to save this position. So, what did Magnus see? Well, there's rook takes. F5-7 is coming. The rook is falling on A8. Magnus will sacrifice the exchange. He plays this move, which the engine, of course, criticizes. But here it's half a point for white. The position isn't lost. Erigaisi, of course, took the rook. And the question that remains in the air. It's marvel. Magnus lost an entire rook. No, that's Neruga's idea. Look, he starts to stir things up in the game. Of course, he's losing the solidity he was hoping for. In this last round, after king to h1, Magnus takes on d3, and here he really is down the exchange. He lost the rook on a8, but recovers some material by taking the bishop on d3, and the pawn on d4 is also falling because now the knight is under threat. Erigaisi moved the knight out of danger, and Magnus takes another pawn. So he's down the exchange. But black has an extra pawn. It's an extremely complicated position, but yes, if he plays everything right, Erigaisi can put on some pressure and try to make a big impact in this game. And you can see that the Indian genius is going to play the precise line. First, he gives a little poke at that queen. That's the best move for white here. When Magnus's queen moves to the Riciclo square, rook comes to c1, and here you're really in trouble. In trouble on the ropes because the bishop is threatened now and there's no way to defend it. Look at this unbelievable thing. There are no squares the bishop can move to without you losing that piece. See here, the most human move is queen. Queen b8. It looks like you save it, but you end up in a lost endgame. Magnus's next move, which the engine considers normal, to me it's not normal. This is brilliant. Let's understand this in detail, why this move is so brilliant. It's obvious that this isn't normal because there's a bishop hanging on c8. So what's the idea? Raphael first, why couldn't queen to b8, which is the most human move, be played? The idea is to trade or force the exchange of rooks. The worst part is that you can't trade these rooks because the position will simplify too much. The endgame without the queens for black will be hopeless, as the material disadvantage will lead to destruction. Keeping the queen on the board is important for black to have counterplay possibilities. Here the best alternative is to refuse the exchange, but with the rook out of play and down the exchange, you're lost, okay? Complaining or hoping for a miracle is futile. Neruga found this one, which is something completely bizarre for a human being to find a move like this. Still keeping the game alive. Of course, Magnus spent some time. Look at the clock ticking, right? 44 minutes on the clock. Now, Raphael, how can this position, this move, not be good? What Erigaisi played, he took the bishop. He took the bishop, and now he already had an extra exchange and an extra piece. Things get complicated, but this move doesn't win the bishop. It's just an exchange. It's an exchange because Magnus replied, tit for tat, queen takes f4. Neruga saw this idea when he played knight f8. The bishop seemed to be falling, but there's also a knight falling on f4 because now you can't take the queen or you'll get checkmated. What a game. A fighter, a warrior. The story continues. Magnus is in a worse position, trying to survive and hold on to a draw, attempting to snatch it from Nori. Erigaisi is playing incredibly well, making unbelievable moves like a machine. Queen to a6 puts the queen under threat. Exchanging simplifies the position. What's the best move here? If you move here, it fails as I capture your queen. It seems like you'll checkmate me, but I counter because the queen controls f1. Magnus has only one move, and everything so far is terrifying. The knight to 8, all of it. Magnus plays another shocking move. He sacrificed the queen. He's worse, nearly losing. This move is brilliant, being his only choice to keep fighting. With the queen falling and everything collapsing, Erigaisi took that queen. He looked him in the eye, wondering what to do next. Magnus takes on c8. And what Magnus is doing here is playing the endgame. Of course, down the exchange. He has a rook and a knight for a queen. And knight takes knight. And at this moment, black is up a pawn. The problem is, how are you going to hold off such an active queen, right? Okay, it's here. Well, Erigaisi first before anything else. Before getting active, he gives his king a breathing square by playing h3, avoiding checkmate with the rook, and c1. Magnus is now stuck. And Erigaisi went for it. If the queen side falls, you're lost, with 2 pawns advancing. The game is nearly over. Magnus is in a losing position against Caruana, but he will continue to fight despite the odds, in a way that's never been seen before. In this position, he played rook to d5. He's saying, well, if the pawn on f5 doesn't fall, I can hold the position. He's attempting to construct a fortress, but the Indian genius caused issues. Look, knight. Knight to a4 pressures the rook. Magnus defended, but the a5 pawn will inevitably fall. It's a mathematical certainty. There's no way to hold it, and the whole queen's flank is going to fall. What can you do? At this moment, Magnus plays a move here that the engine will consider inaccurate, okay? Knight 6, of course, time was already getting tight. Now, I want to point out that Magnus saw the engine's idea, but he didn't execute it in the best possible way. Why? Notice that the engine's move here is knight to g6. Let's understand why this move is the best. It's not knight 6 because Aragace will take this pawn, but Magnus has a plan. The check. Now, taking on b2, the queen's pawn can't be defended. The only defense is with the knight, but the g6 knight comes to h4 and it can't be held. The g2 pawn in black manages to find enough play to try to hold this position. That's what the engine is saying. Now notice that Magnus executed the idea, but not in the correct order. He plays knight to e6 with the idea that Aragace takes the a5 pawn at this moment. But Magnus realized that he can't play rook to c1, so he played the move g5 Raphael. Why can't he play the same line we just saw? Rook to c1, king to d2 threatens to take. Knight to a4 defends. Instead of knight to h4, he plays knight to f4. It looks like it works. But it doesn't work. Look there, you are actually threatening to take here, but then you get queen to c1, and here you lose the game. And here comes the subtlety of the engine's idea, which was to threaten the g2 pawn with the knight on h4, because the knight being on h4 defends the f5 square against this check. So Magnus saw the idea of putting pressure on g2, but the knight isn't on the right square. Look there. White has the f5 square. So this is the subtlety that, of course, makes knight to e6 an inaccuracy here by Magnus. But he's still going to fight with the same idea because, of course, Aragace took on a5 and now Magnus still has to prepare. Look there, knight to f4, the knight is defended. He'll still have to play king to g7 to try to bring the rook to c2. So he's going to give up a few moves to make the idea work. So he saw the idea, but the order of execution wasn't the most refined. Well, Aragace didn't let him. Aragace is also playing. He's watching. Look, he blocked it. Magnus takes advantage as the rook's move complicates things. The knight controls a key square, and the advanced pawn seeks counterplay with g4 exposing the white king. The position is lost, but the game continues. In chess, Aragace played b3, consolidating the knight on c4, preparing for the next move. The human factor and fighting spirit are crucial. Magnus takes another pawn, launching the queen's side and exposing the white king more. Rook to e5. And now a key moment in the game. Here, at this moment, LH1 played king to 2, and it's incredible. But from this moment on, Magnus is going to turn into a machine. He's going to turn into the machine and any other definition. It's not true. He's going to turn into the machine, something never seen before. Here, Magnus makes the machine's first move. King g7. And now, what does he want? Get out of some check, so it keeps getting a little better. Slowly, his position improves. The knight approaches g5 h3, unstoppable. Aragace played queen to 7. Your queenside crumbles. I'll have 2 passed pawns. Magnus threatens the h3 pawn. Aragace responds, sending another piece, forcing your knight to defend. b4 falls. Magnus takes the h3 pawn, king to g2, then the engine move, rook to d3. Suddenly, everything still collapses, the position confuses. Despite the rook advancing and the cavalry moving forward in this intricate position, black still appears to be in a losing situation. Aragace plays this move, check. Magnus, of course, gets out of this check. Knight to 7 is played. Well, and here Magnus needed a draw. The draw would already give him the title. He could repeat the moves. But no, Magnus played to win. Here he took a stance to play this game, to take risks. He really went for it. Aragace said, hold on, this can't be right. The king is so exposed like this. The pawn on b4 falls. And now Magnus blocks. Look at that. The queen on the fourth file, he wants to bring the king in. And there are two knights, a rook, a king. Be careful, your king is alone. And in this position, incredible, but Magnus turned the game around. He turned the game around. It's the most unbelievable thing you can imagine in this scenario here. But he's better here, he's really playing to win. Aragai already has to find difficult moves. Look at that, king to f1, Raphael. That move there is the best move in the position. Anything else, you could get lost. The move that draws the most attention is a 4 because now things start to happen. But you lose the game. Look at that. You get rook to d2, and now, you have few escape squares here. If you play a move like king to e1, you already lose the game. Look at that. Knight to f3. If you play this, you get checkmated. Playing this move also leads to checkmate, illustrating the difficulty of the position. This position is already like this for white. There are too many knights. Knight and rook combined up there on your king. Aragai saw it, and here, it's incredible. But he started to defend a position where he was winning, completely winning, because Neruga started playing like a machine. Scary and terrible. Well, at this moment, Magno plays rook to d2, of course. He wants to bring in the knight. The checkmate threat is starting to appear. Aragai played queen to b, pinning the knight to prevent a threat. Magnus played rook d1 after king g2, rook d2, the position repeated. The king returned, and Aragai aims for a draw. Magnus, no, king to 4. He went with the king. He was pressing to buy time. This will also be a ghost in the game. Aragai targets the vulnerable king. Check on g3, another check on f3. Magnus repeats that Aragai wants the draw. It looks like he's going to accept it. But no, he refuses again. It's a complete shock. No one expected this behavior. In this game, look there, he refused. Now it's a scary line, because this knight comes in and it looks like it's going to be checkmate. The king moves to d4 and Aragai responds with rook, watching that rook. Then, rook to a2 captures the pawn, threatening to advance on the queen side. Now, Aragai has only one move. Even so, he doesn't get lost. And he found it. Queen to d7. And here, be careful, because now your king is in the middle of the board. With 27 seconds left, Magno faced discovered attacks. Knight to 4, rook falls, the defining moment. Time was running out. Magros had 30 seconds, of course, with increment per move. So he speeds up a bit. I'm not sure if it's 30. No, that's the increment, right? It was 2 hours. Magros speeds up, some checks, take a look. After queen to 7, he gives a check. Aragai gets out of check. He repeats once more, and at this moment, after rook to a2, a defining moment because, of course, Aragai brings the king back to e1. And here, let's bring up a detail that during the broadcast, when we were live, we didn't know this was happening, but the position repeated 3 times here. So it's a position that, when it repeats 3 times, it's a draw if the opponent claims it. Magnus, in this position, they drew the game. This draw, of course, gave the title to Magnus, but no, Magnus didn't intend to draw this game. He wanted to keep playing. Look at the images. Aragai, he realized that the position had repeated 3 times and called the tournament arbiter. So Aragai called the arbiter and insisted that the rules be followed and that the position be declared a draw. And that's why the game ended in a draw, because Magnus still wanted to keep fighting, even though the draw already gave him the title in this tournament. In fact, Magnus Carlsen is the champion with this draw. A completely brutal game of struggle, of war, of persistence, perseverance. Neruga keeps being monstrous. Rita Noir, the precision of this skin is unbelievable. Both played excellently. Magnus, despite being in a worse position, still managed to apply more pressure. He made the brilliant knight move, taking e4. This was Aragai's mistake in the final stretch. King h2's position was very confusing. The move was normal, but led to counterplay. With a draw, Magnus won the Norwegian championship, finishing half a point ahead of Caruana. Gukesh, the world champion, took 3rd place. The tournament showcased fighting spirit and determination, with Neruga dominating. Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the analysis, please like the video. See you next time.